Olivia Carter thought this cruise would save her marriage. Daniel Carter hid a dark secret beneath his charming smile. Their daughters, Emily and Grace, were about to witness a nightmare no child should ever see, and Sarah Mitchell, Olivia's closest friend, would uncover a chilling truth that no one expected. What really happened on that anniversary cruise ship? The answer will shock you. The air was thick with excitement as Olivia Carter wheeled her suitcase across the polished marble floor of the cruise terminal. The ocean stretched endlessly beyond the large glass windows, the deep blue waves glittering under the Caribbean sun. She felt a rush of joy, believing this trip would be the beginning of a new chapter in her marriage. Daniel, her husband of 10 years, walked slightly ahead, his expression unreadable behind his dark sunglasses. Their daughters Emily and Grace ran ahead toward the boarding line, laughing as the salty breeze lifted their hair. Olivia's best friend, Sarah Mitchell, trailed close behind, snapping a quick photo of the family. To anyone watching, they looked like the perfect couple celebrating a milestone together. The cruise ship towered above them like a floating city, its white decks gleaming against the horizon. Olivia's mind buzzed with images of candlelit dinners, dancing under the stars, and waking up to the gentle rocking of the sea. Daniel had been unusually quiet on the drive to the port, but she convinced herself he was just tired from work. She had spent weeks choosing the perfect anniversary dress, carefully booking spa appointments, and even surprising him with a private shore excursion. This cruise, she thought, would be their reset button. 10 years was worth celebrating, even if the last few months had been rocky. As they boarded, the sound of steel drums and the chatter of other passengers filled the air. Olivia's eyes darted from one attraction to the next. A glittering pool surrounded by loungers, a rooftop bar that overlooked the sea, and a grand staircase in the main atrium that looked like it belonged in a palace. She felt her heart swell with anticipation. Emily tugged at her arm, eager to explore the game room, while Grace pointed toward a small cafe selling pastries as big as her head. Olivia laughed, soaking in their joy. But when she turned to share the moment with Daniel, she found him staring off toward the horizon, his jaw clenched tight. Sarah noticed it too. She had been friends with Olivia since college, long enough to recognize when something wasn't right. Still, she kept her thoughts to herself, unwilling to dampen the mood. Daniel had always been a bit distant, but on this trip, there was something in his body language, something restrained, like a man holding back words he didn't want anyone to hear. Their cabin was a cozy space with a balcony that overlooked the ocean. The girls ran to claim the top bunk while Olivia stepped outside to breathe in the warm air. The waves shimmered like molten glass beneath the afternoon sun. She felt a flutter of hope in her chest. This was it. This was where they would what had brought them together in the first place. But as she turned back inside, she caught Daniel quickly slipping his phone into his pocket, his expression hardening as he noticed her watching. Dinner that evening was held in the ship's grand dining hall, with towering chandeliers and crisp white tablecloths. A waiter brought champagne, and Olivia raised her glass, her eyes shining. Daniel smiled faintly, clinking glasses without meeting her gaze. The girls chatted about the pool they planned to visit the next day, their voices light and innocent. Sarah watched Daniel from across the table, noting the way he checked his watch repeatedly, as if waiting for something or someone. When dessert came, Olivia excused herself for a moment, leaving Daniel with the children and Sarah. In her absence, Daniel's shoulders seemed to relax. He scrolled quickly through his phone under the table, his lips curling into the faintest of smirks before he slipped the device away. Sarah's stomach tightened. There was a flicker of unease in her mind, a quiet warning she couldn't quite put into words. That night Olivia lay in bed beside Daniel, listening to the low hum of the ship's engines. He was turned away from her, his breathing slow but restless, as though sleep wouldn't come. Outside, the sea stretched endlessly in every direction, and the gentle rocking of the ship seemed almost hypnotic. Olivia closed her eyes, unaware that this trip, the one she had imagined would save her marriage, was about to lead her straight into a nightmare from which there would be no escape. The first full day aboard the ship unfolded beneath a flawless blue sky. Olivia woke early, stepping out onto the Albany to watch the sun break over the horizon, painting the water gold. She told herself this was the beginning of the peace she had been craving. Daniel was still in bed, his arm draped loosely over his side, his phone resting on the nightstand. For a moment she considered picking it up, scrolling through the notifications lighting up the screen, but quickly pushed the thought away. She wanted to trust him. Today was supposed to be about family. Breakfast was served on the open deck, the warm breeze carrying the smell of fresh coffee and baked bread. The girls giggled over stacks of pancakes dripping with syrup while Sarah sat across from Olivia, sipping her tea and taking in the scene. Daniel joined them late, his sunglasses hiding his eyes, his voice flat as he muttered a greeting. He barely touched his food, glancing often toward the far side of the deck where the crowd was thickest. Olivia tried to ignore it, laughing at Emily's joke and asking Grace about the children's activities scheduled for the afternoon. Still, she couldn't shake the slight tension hanging in the air. The day passed in flashes of sunshine and sea spray. The girls spent hours in the pool, splashing and chasing each other through the water. Olivia lay back on a lounge chair, a novel in her lap, though she barely turned the pages. Daniel drifted in and out, disappearing for stretches of time without explanation. Once, she spotted him at the far end of the deck, leaning against the railing, his head bent toward his phone. His posture was closed off, his shoulders hunched, his mouth set in a hard line. When he finally returned, he claimed he had been taking a walk to clear his head, his tone sharp enough to warn her not to press. That evening, the ship's entertainment crew hosted a masquerade ball in the grand atrium. Olivia wore a flowing crimson dress, the mask she had bought in the gift shop resting delicately over her eyes. Daniel looked sharp in his dark suit, though his smile seemed forced when the photographer asked for a picture. The music was lively, couples swaying beneath the glittering chandeliers, but Daniel kept checking his watch, his eyes scanning the room. Olivia noticed him slip away more than once, always returning with the faint smell of alcohol clinging to his breath. Sarah, ever observant, followed him discreetly at one point. She saw him duck into a quieter hallway just off the main deck, his phone pressed tightly to his ear. His voice was low, urgent, and though she couldn't make out the words, his tone was unmistakably intimate. Nothing like the curt way he spoke to Olivia. A woman's laugh drifted faintly from the other end of the line. Sarah froze, the truth pressing down on her like a weight, but she turned away before he could see her. She told herself it wasn't her place to interfere, yet a sick feeling twisted in her stomach. Later that night, Olivia stood at the railing, watching the black water churn in the moonlight. Daniel was nowhere to be seen, and the ship felt too quiet despite the distant hum of music and laughter. Sarah joined her, making small talk about the next day's itinerary, but both women sensed something unspoken lingering between them. Olivia's mind replayed the small, unsettling moments, the late arrivals, the phone calls, the distracted glances, and though she didn't want to admit it, a part of her feared what those pieces might add up to. When Daniel finally appeared, his face was flushed from drink, his eyes sharper than before. He placed a hand on Olivia's back, his grip just a little too firm, guiding her toward the cabin. Sarah watched them walk away, unease prickling her skin. The night air felt heavier now, as though the ship itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next crack to appear. By the third night, the ship had entered a darker stretch of sea. The sky, once clear and bright, was now swallowed by thick gray clouds that rolled in without warning. The wind picked up, carrying the faint smell of rain, and the waves began to swell beneath the massive vessel. Passengers lingered in the indoor lounges, their conversations hushed as the deck creaked under the strain of the weather. The ship's staff reassured everyone that it was nothing unusual for this route, but the unease in the air was hard to ignore. Olivia had spent most of the day trying to keep the atmosphere light. She took the girls to a cupcake decorating class, played card games in the lounge, and even convinced them to join her in the ship's small art gallery. Daniel had been missing for most of it, saying he was caught up with a few things before wandering off. Olivia tried not to dwell on it, but each absence deepened the knot of worry in her chest. Sarah, who had stayed close by her side, noticed the way Olivia's smile never fully reached her eyes anymore. By evening, the rain had begun. Heavy drops splattered against the tall glass windows of the dining hall, blurring the view of the endless water. The captain's voice came over the loudspeakers, advising passengers to remain indoors and avoid the outer decks. Olivia dressed carefully for the anniversary dinner, choosing the elegant blue gown she had been saving for months. She added a silver necklace Daniel had given her years ago, hoping it might remind him of the early days when things felt effortless between them. When Daniel arrived at the table, the change in him was immediate. His suit was rumpled, his hair damp, and there was a faint redness in his eyes that suggested he'd been drinking. The girls greeted him cheerfully, but he only gave a short nod, settling into his seat without looking at Olivia. Sarah studied him from across the table, her suspicion growing. He barely touched his meal, swirling his drink and staring into it, as though it held some private truth. The room around them was warm and full of life. Families laughing, couples toasting, the clinking of silverware and glasses. But at their table, a strange chill settled in. Olivia tried to draw him into conversation, mentioning the beautiful sunset they had seen the night before, but he only muttered a reply, his gaze fixed somewhere over her shoulder. The girls' voices faltered, sensing the tension they couldn't fully understand. At one point, Daniel leaned in toward Olivia, speaking low enough that no one else could hear. Whatever he said made her grip her fork tighter, her knuckles paling, her lips parted slightly, as though she might argue, but then she closed them again, swallowing the words. Sarah watched Olivia's face change, something between fear and disbelief passing over her features. But Olivia quickly forced a smile for the girls' sake. The storm outside intensified, rattling the tall windows. Rain hammered the glass in a steady rhythm, and the ship swayed gently beneath their feet. The movement was enough to make Olivia feel slightly dizzy, though she wasn't sure if it was from the weather or the heaviness in her chest. She stole a glance at Daniel, who sat rigid in his chair, his jaw set like stone. When dessert was served, Daniel excused himself without explanation, disappearing into the dimly lit hallway leading out of the dining room. Olivia's eyes followed him until he vanished from sight. A strange heaviness settled in her stomach, an instinctive warning she couldn't name. Moments later he returned, his expression unreadable, and sat down without a word. The rest of the meal passed in tense silence, the sound of rain filling the gaps where laughter should have been. By the time they left the dining hall, the air in the corridors felt thicker, the distant rumble of thunder echoing faintly through the walls. Olivia kept the girls close, walking beside Sarah toward their cabins. Behind them Daniel followed in silence, the weight of his presence pressing against her back. Somewhere deep down, Olivia knew something had shifted tonight, though she couldn't yet see how close she was to the breaking point. The cabin felt smaller than usual when they returned from dinner. The rain outside had turned to a heavy downpour drumming against the balcony door in a steady, relentless beat. The low groan of the ship's engines mixed with the faint sway beneath their feet, creating a constant sense of motion that seemed to amplify the unease hanging in the air. Emily and Grace moved toward the small couch, curling up together with a blanket. Their laughter from earlier had faded into whispers, as though they could sense the tension thickening around them. Daniel closed the cabin door with more force than necessary. The sound made Olivia's shoulders tighten. He shrugged off his jacket, tossing it carelessly onto the bed. The smell of alcohol clung to him, sharp and bitter, mixing with the faint cologne he had put on earlier. Olivia stood near the balcony, her hands resting lightly on the rail, her back to him. She could see their reflection in the glass. Her still and silent, him pacing like a caged animal. The first words he spoke were low, too quiet for the girls to catch, but the tone was unmistakable. It was sharp, clipped, the kind of voice that carried more danger than shouting. Olivia turned toward him, her expression calm but tense, trying to keep the situation from escalating. She glanced at the girls, silently willing him to remember they were watching. Instead his words became harsher, his voice rising with each sentence. Grace shifted nervously on the couch, clutching Emily's hand. Sarah, in the cabin next door, heard the muffled arguing but didn't yet realize how quickly things were spiraling. Olivia took a cautious step forward, trying to defuse the moment, but the movement seemed to set something off in him. His face twisted in anger, and without warning, he struck her. The sound of the blow cracked through the small space, followed by the dull thud of her body hitting the bed frame. Emily let out a sharp cry, but Olivia motioned faintly for her to stay back. Daniel's breathing had changed, shorter, heavier, as though some invisible line had been crossed, and there was no turning back. Olivia tried to rise, but he came at her again, the second strike harder than the first. The cabin seemed to shrink around them, every sound louder, the girl's sobs, the rain hammering the glass, the dull pounding of Olivia's heart in her ears. When she stumbled toward the corner of the room, Daniel's hands gripped her shoulders, shoving her back against the wall. The motion rattled the picture frame, hanging above the bed. She gasped for air, the metallic taste of blood at the back of her throat. The girls were screaming now, their small voices cutting through the storm outside. Grace called for Sarah, her voice breaking. Next door, Sarah froze when she heard the crash. She didn't hesitate this time. She pounded on the adjoining door, calling Olivia's name, but Daniel's voice drowned hers out, a furious roar, followed by another heavy impact. Sarah's heart pounded as she scrambled for the master key she'd seen the staff use earlier in the week. By the time she pushed the door open, the scene before her stopped her in her tracks. Olivia lay on the floor, her body still, her head turned at an unnatural angle. The girls were pressed into the corner, their faces wet with tears. Daniel stood over Olivia, his chest heaving, his hands trembling but still clenched into fists. For a moment, no one moved. The storm outside seemed to quiet, as if even the sea was holding its breath. Then Sarah rushed forward, pulling the girls toward her, her voice trembling as she shouted for help. Within moments, footsteps thundered in the hallway, the ship's security officers forcing their way inside. The cabin lights seemed harsh and cold, casting every detail into sharp relief. Olivia's pale face, the dark stains spreading beneath her head, and the blood smeared across Daniel's knuckles. Somewhere in the distance, the ship's intercom crackled. But in that cabin, time had already stopped. The cabin was sealed off quickly after the horror unfolded. The soft hum of the ship's engines seemed to grow louder in the sudden silence, filling the air with a mechanical heartbeat that none aboard could ignore. Daniel sat handcuffed on a nearby bench, his face unreadable beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of the security room. His clothes were stained, his eyes glazed and distant. The officers exchanged glances but said little, as if the weight of what had happened was too heavy for words. Meanwhile, Olivia's body was carefully moved to a quiet room on the ship, where a medical examiner awaited. The initial findings confirmed what no one wanted to hear. Olivia's death was not an accident or a tragic consequence of a sudden argument. It was murder, brutal and deliberate, yet the story was far from over. As investigators combed through the cabin and Daniel's belongings, they uncovered layers of secrets hidden beneath the surface of this seemingly ordinary family. Olivia's suitcase was opened carefully, revealing papers folded with care and a small sealed envelope tucked beneath a stack of clothes. Inside were photographs. Daniel with a woman who was not Olivia, a stranger smiling alongside him in places that suggested a long, secret relationship. The discovery sent ripples through the ship's security team. But the photos were only the beginning. Among the papers were bank statements, showing a series of large withdrawals from Olivia's personal accounts. Withdrawals she hadn't authorized. The money had been funneled into unknown accounts, suspicious and hidden. It became clear that Daniel had been stealing from the woman he was supposed to love. A betrayal deeper than anyone had imagined. Sarah, still reeling from the night's horror, sat quietly with the girls in a secured cabin. Emily and Grace clung to each other, their wide eyes haunted by what they had witnessed. Sarah gently explained that the adults were trying to understand everything, but even she didn't know how to answer their questions about why someone could hurt their mother so badly. Back with the investigation, one detail puzzled the team most. The envelope also contained a letter written in Olivia's hand. It was a plan, a roadmap for escape and a new life far away from Daniel's controlling grip. She had intended to file for divorce the moment the ship docked at their next port. The letter spoke of hope and fear, describing months of hiding her plans even from close friends. Olivia had been desperate, trapped in a marriage that had been crumbling for years beneath a facade of happiness. For Daniel, the evidence painted a chilling picture. His rage on the ship wasn't the sudden spark of passion that some crimes claim to be. It was the violent explosion of a man desperate to hold on to everything slipping away. The betrayal cut both ways. Not only had Olivia planned to leave, but she had discovered his lies. The woman on the side, the theft from her accounts. His control was unraveling, and in that small cabin on the ship he lost himself completely. The ship's captain made an emergency announcement, informing passengers of the tragedy and the change in itinerary. The cruise would be cut short, and authorities were waiting at the next port to take Daniel into custody. The news rippled through the ship like a shockwave. Guests whispered in corners, casting nervous glances at the family who had seemed so perfect just days before. In the days that followed, the cruise staff worked to support Emily and Grace, helping Sarah take care of them as they tried to hold their shattered world together. The girls' innocence had been stolen alongside their mother's life, leaving behind a fragile silence that seemed impossible to fill. Behind the scenes, the investigation continued. Every message on Daniel's phone, every bank transaction, every moment of his past was examined for clues. The truth was a heavy, dark weight pressing down on everyone involved, but it was necessary. Justice, they all hoped, would be the only light left after the storm. If you want, I can expand the final chapter next to wrap up the story with the court proceedings and emotional fallout, keeping the suspense and impact strong. The ship's course changed abruptly, slicing through the waves toward the nearest port where the authorities waited. Passengers moved with whispered urgency, their cheerful vacation moods replaced by a somber silence that settled over the decks like a thick fog. The vibrant music and laughter that had once filled the halls were now distant echoes, replaced by low conversations and stolen glances toward the Carter family. The anniversary cruise meant to celebrate love had become a haunting memory for all aboard. Emily and Grace clung tightly to Sarah as the ship docked. Their faces, still stained with tears, bore the weight of what they had witnessed, an innocence forever fractured by violence. Sarah tried to shield them from the prying eyes of reporters and bystanders, but the questions would come, and the world outside would want to know every detail. The girl's small hands trembled in hers, a silent plea for safety and normalcy that felt impossible to provide in that moment. Daniel was led off the ship in handcuffs, his steps heavy and slow. The crowd that gathered outside the port's terminal murmured in shock and disbelief. He showed no emotion, his face a mask of cold detachment that chilled those who looked upon him. As he was escorted into the waiting police vehicles, whispers followed him, about the man who had seemed so charming, so controlled, now exposed as a violent killer. The investigation moved swiftly, once on land. Prosecutors pored over the evidence gathered at sea, the photographs, the bank records, Olivia's letter, and the testimonies of those who had seen the cracks in Daniel's facade. The media seized on every detail, painting a picture of a man whose jealousy and desperation had spiraled into horrific violence. Court dates were set, and the story gripped the public's attention, turning into a headline that spread far beyond the cruise terminal. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Emily and Grace sat beside Sarah, their faces pale but resolute, drawing strength from the presence of someone who loved them fiercely. The prosecution laid out a case that was both heartbreaking and damning, revealing the slow unraveling of a marriage poisoned by secrets, lies, and betrayal. Daniel's defense attempted to cast doubt, claiming provocation and stress, but the evidence was overwhelming. Each day of the trial brought new revelations. Witnesses spoke of Daniel's controlling behavior, his volatile temper, and the hidden life he had kept from his family. Olivia's friends and colleagues painted a picture of a woman trapped in a cage she had desperately tried to escape. As the jury retired to deliberate, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Hours stretched into a day, and then another. Outside, the public waited anxiously, the story still fresh in their minds. When the verdict finally came, the courtroom held its breath. Guilty. The word hit like a thunderclap, echoing in the silence that followed. Daniel Carter was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. For Emily and Grace, justice was a bitter relief. Their lives would never be the same, but the verdict marked the beginning of healing, a slow, painful journey toward reclaiming hope. Sarah vowed to be their protector, their voice when theirs faltered, and their guide through a world forever changed.